but I remember your smile like it was yesterday's dream. 'Cause seeing you takes me back to the first kiss on our first date, slow dancing at a football tailgate, counting shooting stars in my backyard, loving that love of ours. Loving that love of ours. Loving that love of ours. It was 4:15 on a Friday afternoon. You walked through my office door with roses in full bloom. You say, how about a date, dinner and some beers? We can toast to fate and catch up on those years. 'Cause seeing me took you back to our first kiss on our first date, slow dancing at a football tailgate, counting shooting stars in my backyard, loving that love of ours. Our first kiss on our first date, slow dancing at a football tailgate, counting shooting stars in my backyard, loving that love of ours. Loving that love of ours. Loving that love of ours. Maybe if lightning can strike the same place twice, maybe twice in love can be twice as nice. A first kiss on our first date, slow dancing at a football tailgate, counting shooting stars in my backyard, loving that love of ours. A first kiss on our first date, slow dancing at a football tailgate, counting shooting stars in my backyard, loving that love of ours. 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 Loving that love of ours.
Hello, everyone. And hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Kate Treitman Brown. I graduated Nobles in the class of '99, and I'm the Director of Graduate Affairs. As I said in the chat, we know you have a lot of choice right now for what to tune into, especially virtually, so we appreciate you spending the next half hour to 40 minutes with us. Special thanks to the Graduate Council and to the tech team at Nobles for helping us to engage with you, hopefully smoothly. So I'm thrilled to welcome our two panelists, Christy Strawbridge and Jill Walsh. Christy and Jill graduated from Nobles in 1996, and that means they were seniors when I was in 9th grade, so I very much look up to them both. They will be speaking this evening about workplace transformation, specifically the ways in which the workplace has changed in the last 4 months. We'll hear from our panelists, but if you have any questions, feel free to pop it into the Q&A and we'll get to them during the presentation. And now for our panelists, and I'll invite them to show themselves. Christy Strawbridge is the Senior Vice President and Director of Transformation at State Street, where she's worked for the past 3 years. Before State Street, Christy was at Goldman Sachs in New York and Boston, and she started her career at Thomson Financial. Christy earned a Bachelor of Business Administration from Boston University. Dr. Jill Walsh is a researcher and lecturer at Boston University and the Department of Sociology. Jill focuses on adolescent social media use. She's also the founder of Digital Aged, a consulting group that educates students, families, and educational institutions about positive technology use. Jill's book, Adolescents and Their Social Media Narratives, A Digital Coming of Age, was published in 2017. Jill earned a BA from Harvard and a master's in public policy from Brown. Welcome, Christy and Jill.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hi,
Kate.
How
Hi,
are
Jill.
you?
Great. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to do this with you.
I know.
Um,
I'm excited too.
So I'd love to start off and just hear how your role has changed in the last few months, given everything that's going on, what feels different, what's exciting, what's really challenging, all of it.
So I have an interesting role at State Street, and it basically is managing change throughout the organization. And so there has been some positive news on that and also some challenges, as you mentioned. So I think that what this has shown us is the art of the possible. And we've achieved more than we ever dreamed we could from a work from home environment, which will certainly be reflected in how we think about corporate real estate going forward. There has been unprecedented market volatility and market volume over the course of the past few months. And we've navigated all of that through working from home. And we're not the only company who has done this. So I think that from a financial services perspective, this has been really eye-opening to the art of what's possible. And, you know, certainly when we think about what we had set out to do in 2020 and what that looked like, we have now had to pivot on a few things. And it's been a little bit of a pause on a few certain areas. And then we've seen some things that we can expedite on that we really did not think were going to be possible, you know, just even a few months ago. So it's given us really good perspective. We have changed our priorities in some cases, but really it's just about the path to the finish line might look a little bit different, and we might just be doing it a little bit differently, but you know, the corporate strategy still remains intact. So it's been an exciting time, and you know, we're all getting a few gray hairs, but that's okay. It's going to be one of those defining moments in all of our careers. So I'll ask the same question back to you, Jill. How has the educational world handled all of this, and what are you seeing in your research and at BU?
Yeah, thanks. I love what you said about the end being the same, but the path looking really different, because that's exactly what the spring felt like for me. So obviously I had to move all of my classes online, as well as my consulting work with schools. So talking to students on Zoom only. So I had to change both what I teach and how I teach, which I agree with you was equal parts super stressful and also kind of invigorating. It made me sort of think differently about what I can ask of my students and also what I can ask of myself, like what's actually possible, what needs to be done versus what is okay if we skip, right? I had a whole syllabus ready to go for all my classes, and mid-semester I had to throw the whole thing out. And it was kind of terrifying. And then I think by the end it became pretty exciting. Like I'm actually pretty energized about the changes to my classes. So that part feels great. A little bit has shifted in the last couple of weeks for us. We are now having at BU some really hard conversations, both potentially coming back to campus in fall and what that might look like. And also some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that we as an institution have to do. And we're having those really hard conversations on Zoom, right? Where there's the mute button and people have Wi-Fi delays. And so these are hard conversations to have in general. And I think they've sort of become even harder because we're doing it all virtually.
Yeah. So, and we should get to that. Let's table that, because I know that we do have some questions that we want to get to, but let's talk about the Zoom bit once we get to some of those later questions in the conversation. But Jill, just on a personal level, how are you doing? You're a mom, you are working from home, you have a lot going on. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's great. If you saw the other side of my dining room table, you would know how I'm doing. This side is clean. This side is complete chaos. You know, it's a challenge certainly that we're all having to manage that, you know, work-life balance, whatever that looks like when we're all home all the time, which we can both talk about. But certainly adding my kids' remote learning to the whole thing. Added another layer. I would say most days I was only doing like 50% on anything and becoming okay with that was a challenge. For me personally, it was ironic a bit because I started to like live my research, right? So I do all this research on teenagers and technology, and then all of a sudden I found myself on technology all the time. And I usually don't scroll social media a ton personally because I do it for work. And I found myself down the rabbit holes of like comparing other people's pandemic lives to my own, right? Which is exactly what I talk to kids about. So it was kind of funny to take my own advice. Personally, the one upside that I had was in some strange ways, I think it made my connections with my students and colleagues stronger, because I think they were so just exposed to like my life, right? Like, there were days when, my dog was in class with me, or, they heard my kids in the background, or one day my daughter treated my class to her recorder practice, right? Which no one wants to hear, even parents don't want to hear that, right? And I had the same experience with them. I had students where, pets were there, and parents and all that kind of stuff. And I think it kind of humanized us, and sort of, I think there was less pressure to be perfect, which kind of felt great in some ways. I don't know. How was it for you, or how has it been?
Yeah, so I'm not a mother, so that's one role that I don't have to play. But I do find that when we were first starting on this journey, we had a division of I'm a wife at home, and I'm a manager, and I'm a coworker in the office, and then I'm a gym buddy, or I'm a volunteer person at the charter school where I volunteer. So there was a very clear segregation of when and where I played these roles and how I did them and the time that I allotted to them. And it felt like it all came crashing down at once, and I was being asked to play multiple roles all at the same time. And it was really hard to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to turn my computer off. I'm no longer a coworker and a manager. I'm now going to go and spend some time on Zoom, or I'm going to go and socially distance with some friends. It really did feel like work was bleeding into absolutely everything. And because we didn't have dinner plans, or we weren't going on vacation, people felt like it was okay to book meetings at 9 p.m. at night and start at 6 a.m. And I think that we've found as an organization, and I hope that other people find too, that it's on us to respect ourselves and also to respect each other during this time. And even if we are not going on vacation because Disney World is closed, or we're not taking that time away, it's really important to say, no, this is the time that I'm going to spend with my family. And if I have a wonderful woman on my team who said, you know what, I need to get my kids organized for homeschool in the morning, and for the next month I can't do meetings from 7 to 9. And I said, that is exactly what I needed to hear, and thank you for telling me that. So now we can work around that and figure out how to do something that's going to work for both. And, I think that communication, and to your point, Jill, the honesty, that we need to be honest with each other, that these roles are really challenging, and finding the boundaries right now is very important. I hope that everyone who is on the call is taking a little bit of time off for the upcoming holiday. And even if you aren't going anywhere, you don't have plans, please take the time to disconnect, do something different, or just be with your friends, or read a book, or whatever it is that recharges you. It's very important, I think, now more than ever, to make a much more conscious effort on that front to separate those roles and really set some boundaries. So Jill, tell us a little bit about some of the silver linings here. You touched a little bit on that before, but tell us let's talk about the positive, because it's certainly been challenging.
Yeah, it definitely has. I think overall, like I said, I think there's this humanizing experience that I had with my students. And actually it's probably true of anyone who goes through hard times with a certain group, but I do feel they're still reaching out to me. They want to talk. I think we sort of became connected in a way that I think in college, a lot of the classes are more, they come into the lecture hall, then they leave, they don't really engage that much. And so in some odd ways, although we were so physically removed from each other, it actually was kind of nice. So I think that's something I'd like to consider, even if we are back on campus, how to bring that to classroom experience, because I love that part of it's kind of the stuff I loved being a student at Nobles, right? Of like knowing the faculty and having relationships with them. So that's definitely a silver lining that I want to move forward. I think the other thing for me is it really clarified some priorities, both personally and professionally, about what I actually wanted to get done. Because I don't know about you, Christy, but I have a to-do list that could go onto 7 different pages if I let it, right? And just recognizing that it wasn't going to happen. So what do I actually care about? What work do I actually care about moving forward on? And so I always have like 4 or 5 research projects that are kind of like in different stages. And some of them I had to actually kind of say, you know what, I'm sort of okay with tabling that for a year. And if I get back to it, I get back to it, great. And if I don't, but this other thing, it would break my heart to leave it, right? And so then I could sort of focus my energies on that. So in that regard, I think it really helped clarify what mattered to me, and sort of got me back to my core research interests. Because, you know, there's always things you get yourself, you have a great conversation. You're like, oh, I'd love to get involved in that. And right. And you sort of spread yourself really thin. And I couldn't stay that way. So that, I think, for me was really helpful. And then the last thing, which is what I said, which is kind of like this weird experience of living and my research and taking my own advice has actually given me a lot. I always had tremendous empathy for what teenagers are doing and managing digitally, but now trying to do it myself, I have even more empathy for them. So I do feel like my, you know, engagements with them next year is going to come from a place of like, oh gosh, I really understand how hard this is. So that was sort of, for me, that's where it lies. But I don't know, how about you? What are the big silver linings?
So it's similar to what you're saying about I love the human aspect. I feel like we've gotten to know each other a little bit more by being invited into people's homes, which is really interesting. We've definitely had to connect and communicate more about what's working and what's not, because you can't always get that on a Zoom call. So I think that we've all really had to be a lot more honest with each other in the workplace, and, you know, certainly with friends and things like that too. So I think the one key thing is the prioritization of how I spend my time has been, I've really taken some stock in family and friends and networking, and really been very diligent about when and where I spend my time and who I choose to spend it with. So one thing that I would say is that networking has got to continue. So for all the people on the call who say, well, I'm looking for a new job, or I'm, you know, thinking about making a change and I'll wait until all of this blows over, that's really not the way to handle this, because we don't know what normal looks like. I'll use air quotes. We don't know when we're going to get back to a state that is going to ever feel normal. Things might just be different. And I think to make a really conscious effort to stay in contact with your network, whether it's personal or professional, is really important. And Nobles can provide that. And there are a lot of forums to get involved. All of you on the call tonight have been, you know, you're networking, you're joining a forum to have a discussion and hopefully learn a few tips and tricks here. But being really conscious about having those Zoom calls and having those video calls, putting yourself on video. I think that's another really important thing. When you have calls, being present on the video, while it is challenging and weird and some people might not like it, it's very important, because it really does give you a little bit more of that personal interaction. Now, they are saying that there's a lag on Zoom, and so your brain actually gets fatigued from trying to read social cues on Zoom, more so than you would be reading social cues in a room or a gathering with people in person. But I think it's really important to continue that work and reaching out to people and setting up time. And the Nobles Directory is a great platform to continue to do that and to reach out to your colleagues. I know we had a small group of people who got together from our class earlier this year, and it was great to see everyone. And this was the opportunity to reconnect, because we knew that everyone was home and we hadn't connected since the last reunion. So it was good. There are definitely some silver linings, but I do think that the silver linings present themselves when you put yourself in the opportunity to allow it to happen, and you create those opportunities for yourself.
Yeah,
so
I think that is so. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that. And I was saying to you earlier when we were chatting just briefly, like how often my students have been asking me for networking advice, because they're feeling like they're not currently in a situation, like they don't want to network with me, right? They want to network with you. And so, but they're sort of feeling like, oh gosh, to do an introductory Zoom is challenging, number one. And also that everybody's so spread so thin right now, and everybody's so busy. I hate to like burden people. And that's the words they use, is like burden people with it. But I think your point is so right, which is like, we're actually catching people at a time when, yes, everyone's schedule is busy, but we're sort of glued to this thing. And so adding a 15-minute session with somebody isn't actually all that much extra work. Whereas like meeting someone for a coffee and like getting out of your, like that's actually more work, right? So
Totally agree.
yeah, so some ways I think it's like actually a perfect time to do it. And I've noticed with things like when I've been doing webinars with schools for parents, we have much higher attendance than when we do it in person, because it's so much easier for parents to just, you know, tune in for a little bit. They can be in whatever, their sweatpants. You don't have to feel like you're making an effort, which is, so I think it can go both ways. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think you're right. The 15-minute meeting is all you really need. You don't need to ask someone for an hour, because networking is not one meeting where you tell someone how great you are and then they hire you. Networking is building an authentic relationship, and that starts with a 15-minute chat and then finding some common ground and how can I help you and how can we have a more continuous dialogue so that you're on my radar when I'm going to hire someone on my team, or I know that you would be a good fit for something else. I mean, it's really, it's an authentic relationship building process, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I think we all have fantastic networks that were kicked off when we went to Nobles, and rekindling some of those relationships and that network is a really great thing to start doing now.
Totally agree.
So Jill, let's talk a little bit more about your research, and you are an expert on this. You are the expert on what we are all living of this, being on the Zoom calls, you know, on a really regular basis. For me, certainly it is, unfortunately, it's like 14 to 16 hours a day. So, you know, what is this, what are the things that we need to be aware of, and how is this affecting us, and how do we make sure that we combat some of the effects that this might be having?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I do really think Zoom fatigue is real, and we know it. I mean, we probably all feel it a bit ourselves, but it actually is a real thing. And there's all sorts of great research that would suggest, you know, people will do anything to get out of being on video. They'll lie. I mean, it's harder during a pandemic to claim you have other things to do, but like always people will lie, make up excuses so they can turn their video off, right? All that kind of stuff. It's just so hard to look at yourself. And, you know, I mean, the first week of teaching, I was like, that's what I look like when I'm talking. I had no idea. Getting used to that is really a lot. It's exhausting. You're managing so many things. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind with any type of video conferencing platform is it actually, it flattens affect. And so it's really hard to see how people are actually feeling. And so a lot of times people, you know, I'll be yammering on and people kind of look pretty bored, right? And pretty miserable. And it's hard to know, is that, right? So then you start reading into it, and is it me? Did I say something? And it actually is the screen. Have an affect on Zoom, you have to be, and that's exhausting too, right? So it's just that your brain is required to do all this other processing instead of just the topic or the conversation, right? You're paying attention to what you look like. You're looking at where everyone else is and what their houses look like. And you're, you know, seeing how everyone responds when you say something, right? It's all those things are playing out. So I think like for me, the thing that I have found most effective, particularly with my students, but I think this would apply in any workplace, is just naming the awkwardness of it. And I think so often we've, you know, because we all moved mountains, right? In 3 months. I mean, the work was extraordinary, and it was amazing what people were able to kick off. And I mean, at BU, we had 3 days to go online, right? So that's amazing. And I think there's a lot of narrative out there that's like, look how great this turned out, so great. And we did great. And that's great, right? And it's so all true. But there's also this other part, which is that it's weird. Some people don't feel comfortable talking on it. Some people don't even like seeing the little yellow box around their name. Like whatever it is, like I think it's really important to name that for people, because it's hard to build community digitally. We know that. It's easy to maintain community digitally, but it's hard to build a community digitally. And one of the things that can really alienate people is if you're sitting there feeling awkward, you're feeling like, you know, this isn't working for you, and everybody's like, rah, rah, we've done such a great job, this is great. You know, it's even more alienating. So I think being able to name both like, wow, this is amazing, and look what we can do, and we've done this so fast, and also it's awkward. Sometimes someone's on mute and everyone's going, you're on mute. You know, there's all these things that break up the conversation, that make it disjointed. And just acknowledging that both of those things exist, I think goes such a long way for people.
I would totally agree with that. And I think that the one of the other things is that there are all these social cues that they're saying, to your point, it's really helpful to be almost more over the top. But what you would normally, you would agree with someone verbally in a meeting, but now everyone's doing this on the on the Zoom, which is so weird. But it actually makes sense, because if we are all saying yes and agreeing to each other, it's really not going to come across properly in the video and in the microphones, and we're all going to be stumbling over each other. So there are these physical cues that people are now giving in Zoom and on the video calls that we just would never do in a conference room. So it feels like this social aspect is very different. And there is etiquette that needs to be followed that it is challenging.
Yeah. And
certainly using the chat feature is something that I think is really great. And it's nice to just acknowledge people in the chat. So I think, to your point, when we're on these calls, it's very important to be aware of yourself as a presenter, but it's also equally important to support the presenters and be a good listener and a good observer and give that feedback that, to your point, they're not getting, because it's all totally flat on the video. So the presenter is getting very little back from the room that they would get in a formal setting. So I think that there's a lot that we can do on both sides, and we're all learning this as we go.
I agree.
So I think, Jill, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just starting to look at some of the questions. I don't know.
Yes, perfect.
There's one question that's just sort of like, what do you see happening with workplaces that are connected to other cities, other countries, you know, as sort of like, I'm sure in your line of work, that's a major factor, limited travel, sort of how are you navigating that?
Yeah, so I will definitely take that. So going back to our silver linings, that is absolutely one of the silver linings of all of this, where we were in multiple locations before. Some people were at home, some people were in the office, some people were dialing in from their desks. And there was a really uneven playing field between the people who were in the conference room and the people who were on the phone. That is now totally equalized. Everyone is present on the video. Everyone has an equal part to play, and it's an equal playing field. And I think that that's one of the things that has really been the silver lining here for us, is that the connectivity actually is better now than it was when we were all in disparate locations. But Jill, to your point, which I really like, is that it's easy to maintain, it's hard to build. That would have been really hard if we had been just starting from scratch, trying to build all of that from home, but now it's actually been easier to maintain it. So I do think that the connectivity across countries from a financial services standpoint and, you know, from what I've seen, has really been positive.
Yeah, that's great.
How are you guys seeing that, Jill? Is that something that you are living with at BU as well?
I am. So we have about, well, I have had in my class, I shouldn't speak for the university, but I have in my classes usually about 30% international students. So I had a lot of students this spring who, when BU shut down, went back to China or went back to Argentina or wherever they were living. And so all of a sudden we were on all different time zones. And so for us to have a class discussion that wasn't at 3 a.m. for one person, so we ended up doing, in this regard, I actually did more videos and had them chatting with each other through video discussions and meeting in small groups. So again, just a change of the class. But for me, it was definitely the time zones. I just didn't feel like I could ask undergrads to get up at 3 a.m. to listen to me for an hour and a half. So yeah, we had to be very creative with that.
All right, so let's scroll through some of these other questions. We've got some good ones here. So how do we recover from all of this screen time? Jill, do you have any tips for us?
Yeah, we have to step away from it. I mean, have to. And I think one of the things that is really hard is exactly you articulated so beautifully, the positive side, which is like we can get together with people we can't always see, right? I got together with a bunch of my Nobles rowing friends, right, on Zoom, and we hadn't been together in ages, all in one space, right? We could do that because we were home. The downside is it made my 12 hours on Zoom go to 13 hours on Zoom, right? And so loved connecting with them. I didn't quite that same like level of energizing that you usually leave social interactions with. I was like, okay, I stared at the screen a little longer. So I think particularly now, as at least in Massachusetts, we're moving a little bit more to some social distancing opportunities to be able to take those, and whether it's taking a walk with someone instead of doing a Zoom meeting. We've been talking at BU, particularly around some of the anti-racist work that we're doing, of just gathering in small, like groups of 3 or 4 outdoors to do that work instead of trying to do it on screen. So I think the more we can take off the screen, the better. The other thing, which is exactly what you said, Christy, which is like shut the screen down, right? Make sure, even though we're home and you can always see your work and you can always jump on a call and you can always answer an email, try to make sure you don't, because it doesn't, we really do need a break from it. But it's really hard to monitor yourself, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. It's really hard. And I think just being conscious of taking the time and just going for a walk, and the social interaction is important, but also I find just the alone time, like just going and taking a walk, I find is a really good way to end the day, even if it's just a quick one.
Totally. I drove in April, I got in my car and just drove for 20 minutes. To listen to music and not look at the screen and be alone. Yeah. It was like the best 20 minutes of April for me. Yeah. So yeah. Exactly. Totally a fan.
Yep. So here's a good one. Since the young generations are so well versed in digital learning and communication, could you think the current situation is a boon to these students?
That's a good question. I think it's actually very interesting. I think a lot of them are articulating tech fatigue in the ways that I think their parents always lectured to them about, and now they're saying it. So that's actually pretty amazing. So I think they're certainly much better at like jumping onto all these things and quickly moving all their work to Google Docs, and you know, all those things that they probably a generation ago would have been a real challenge. That was all seamless. However, I think when I talk to them in focus groups, they're like, I have nothing to say to anybody. I'm so sick of staring at a screen. I just want to throw my phone across the room. So all the things we kind of like hoped for, they're actually learning on their own. With one caveat, which is the one thing I think is increasing, and it's probably increasing for adults too, I would be guilty of this, is multitasking. Multitasking is, we all know that, but it is skyrocketing with kids because, you know, it's just, if you have working parents or guardians, you maybe don't have people who are monitoring your tech use as easily. So it's so easy in a boring class to just quickly jump on your phone, right? And so a lot of kids will tell me they're playing video games underneath the table while they're in class. So I think that kind of stuff they need more help with because it's just really tempting to grab your phone or quickly fire off a group text about something funny that happened. So I think in some regards, they're certainly more prepared. I think they've come around to the adult perspective on tech use, which is kind of exciting. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. But then I do still worry about multitasking a lot. And I do it too.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, we are all totally guilty of it. Yep. So there's another good question here on women in the workplace and gender parity, which I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about. And I think that there is a sentiment that women need to be playing multiple roles because they're now their mother, they're the teacher, they're doing all of these things all at once. And, you know, it is a challenge. It is a challenge. But I do think that there are a lot of women who used to travel a lot for work, just as there were a lot of men that used to travel for work, and they are now at home. So, you know, I think that being clear about boundaries, being true to yourself about how many roles you can actually play at once and say, okay, I can't be mom and teacher and coworker, you know, you need to stop from, you know, like I said, I have an amazing woman on my team who said, you know, a couple days a week, 7 to 9, I just can't do it. And we all need to be empathetic and understanding that this is the new reality. Now, I do think that we are potentially in the hardest moment of this right now, where if you have children, they do not have care. You do not have help. The teachers are now, a lot of schools are done for the summer. There is no summer camp. So this is falling solely to mom and or dad. And so I do think that we are in the hardest moment of this right now, and recognizing that is really important. As things change and people go back to the office and daycare opens up and school hopefully will be back in session, or we will figure out how to do the online thing more effectively, I think this will get better. But it's not going to get better unless we take the steps for ourselves and for each other to make it better, and really be honest with what this is going to look like in the future. Like I said, companies are really being, a lot of them are being very flexible about, do you want to come back to the office? Do you not want to come back to the office? How can we be more accommodating? And I think, I will be perfectly honest, I was not a huge fan of work from home. Right. I wanted to be in the office. I liked it when my team was in the office. I just found it to be so much easier to connect with everyone, and we could all yell at each other, and we were all right there. And I've spent most of my life on a trading desk, so I think that's where it came from. Right. But we are better connected now, and I think more productive, since we have been at home, set some clear boundaries, and we've gotten our feet under us on how we're going to engage. And technology has helped with that. We have some fantastic technology that has really definitely enabled that. But we are very clear about how we're going to run meetings, and they're different. There was a question in the chat too about how are we doing project management, and that's a key part of what I do. The communication, the clarity of, we're coming into a meeting, I'm gonna flash a PowerPoint slide up on the deck or up on the screen, and these are the 3 things we're going to accomplish in this meeting. If you do not feel that you need to be here, or you do not have, you can listen in, but if you've been added to this because you're the 17th forward on this meeting invite, it is okay to drop. Yeah. And so be on the meetings that where you can add value and where you are going to actually make a difference. And you can stay on and be informed if you want to, but let me help you prioritize too, so that you don't leave a meeting after an hour and say, well, that was a colossal waste of time. That was totally not what I thought the meeting was about. So, being really clear and concise in our communication to help each other prioritize is also a key component of what's going to help us be better at this in the future.
I love that. I love that it was from a classmate. Hi, Katie. But I love, Christy, what you said about setting honest boundaries, because I think especially for women, and this is something that we talk a lot about in sociology, right, is like sort of the fear of being the person to say, I can't do that. Right. Or that doesn't work for me, and it's because of my kids, right? And so we talk a lot about the second shift, which is the second shift at home, but now we have the virtual shift, right, too, added to this. So there's really like 3 shifts going on, and it can be really hard, I think, for women to say, and I certainly struggle with this, of being the one to say, I actually can't do that, or that time doesn't work for me, and because of my kids, right? And feeling like, and actually I don't ever need to say that, I don't need to say it's because of my kids. I could just say it doesn't work for me. But it's like the working mom, feeling where I'm like, oh, I'm always the one that can't do it, right? So I think, your openness and what you're talking about framing this to your team as like, just tell me and be honest and we'll work around it, is so amazing to hear, because that's certainly, I don't think everybody's experience. So that's awesome.
Well, I will say it's easier said than done. I am still very much a work in progress too. So we are all working on this together. There was another question from Tom, another fellow classmate, that I think is really good and should be addressed, because we have a lot of young people who this is going to be important for, and certainly for anyone who's looking to make a job change, this is going to be really important. So how do you see digital technology impacting recruiting, new hires? We don't have these face-to-face relationships. How are we ever going to get caught up and feel like we're part of a group and get all of this rolling? So Tom, it's a really good question. I think that there are a couple of things, and I will start with the fact that there is definite Zoom etiquette. I mean, Jill, you and we practiced this. I went to 15 different places in my house to find the best Wi-Fi connection and the best lighting for this time of day, and made sure that I didn't have some crazy background. So, making sure that you have proper Zoom etiquette for an interview or for a networking session is really important. It's no different than putting on your favorite outfit when you go to an interview. If you wouldn't do that in person, don't do it on Zoom. And don't do it on your video calls. I mean, it's really important to follow the same rules. You might be in your pajama bottoms, but you have a blazer up top.
Totally.
And so Jill, tell us a little bit about how you guys are seeing, because I think this is in the thread of our networking as well. It's really important.
I agree. And I think it's incredibly hard to do first impression this way, right? And that's sort of what is kind of getting out of this, like, how do you create a community? How do you create connection when it's digital and like, I'm interrupting you and then you're and we're doing this kind of dance back and forth. And it's certainly awkward. And I think one of the things that my students have done a lot of their interviews for jobs on Skype, and that was true actually before this, just because flying everywhere and trying to figure things out. So I 100% agree with you that there's etiquette about behavior. I think the other thing to remember is that, it's really tricky because all they're getting is your face, pretty much. I mean, unless you're like a super hand gesture, all they're getting is your face. So all the other cues you might give them they're not seeing it, right? So it does feel really fake, but like a lot of nodding is a really good idea. Smiling is a really good idea, right? Those things that help you engage, just like if you think about just your little screen, that's what they're seeing. And so that's all they're going by. And that is your first impression. So I think just keeping that in mind, that you don't have sort of, anything else except your face. Ugh, that feels intimidating and awful to me, but going. So thinking about that, I think also the more you can do to figure out how, and this I think would go both sides, it would be to the person maybe doing the interview and also to the interviewee, is figuring out in the first couple of minutes how to create a connection that isn't about the job or isn't about the work. And this is one of the things I started doing in my class, was giving the first 5 minutes to every lecture for students to talk about just in their life. And so I actually gave it as an extra credit. You could earn points in my class if you wanted to be the person who shared. And so one person took us on, showed us or played a song that meant a lot to him in high school. Another person showed us their cat, right? But the beauty of that is not seeing the cat, right? I love the cat, but that wasn't it. The beauty of it is it focuses them on each other, and not as like, I'm going to lecture and then you're going to respond. It actually became a little bit of a dialogue. And so the more I think we can do in those early moments to sort of foster something that isn't, I'm going right in with my first question, or here's my, that kind of thing, I think goes a long way to helping people feel at ease. But it's really hard to do it this way. I agree.
So I'm trying to think if we have other questions in the, I think we've covered most of them.
Yeah, I think we.
All right, I think we've covered most of them. All right, and Kate, you're doing a great job emceeing behind the scenes, so thank you.
I know, this
so
is awesome.
If there aren't any other questions, Kate, is there anything else that you want us to cover? I know that there is definitely, there's some things in the chat. So if everyone can go into the chat, you'll see the Nobles graduates and directory platform, Jill's book, which is a fantastic read. I will give you the plug, Jill, because I know it's always awkward to plug your own book. But certainly a digital coming of age is really very, very important now more than ever. So this is timely. But thank you, Nobles, for having us here, for having this discussion, for allowing us to share hopefully a couple of tips and tricks. And I know that these sessions are continuing. Jill, did you have some notes on the future panel?
I did. Next week, next Tuesday, there's a panel that is offering for racial justice with the Nobles librarians and Kim Neal from the Office of Communications. So that sounds awesome. And they're going to go through all the resources we can all access as grads, which is great. So yeah.
All right. Fantastic. Jill, great to see you. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.